Process and journey, in their loosest sense, provide an idea that there is a method involved to progress from beginning to end. I think there are three main elements of process and journeys, those being repetition, physicality, and the remnants of process and journeys. For example, firstly, taking a photograph, and then where the photograph will then be taken, is what I'm dealing with here. The question here being is how integral, therefore, are the activities and procedures to the understanding of work such as development, both physical, in terms of converting a negative to an actual image, and professionally, as a photographer and artist. I will then begin with what I think is most prevalent in the work of Moyra in terms of process and repetition. Repetition has become a key element in contemporary art, especially since the rise of the minimalist pop art movement in the 1960s, most famously Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein. The point being in this movement is that the work has specific significance on the processes taking place. Mass production, seen in the typically notified Campbell's soup cans, is accentuated by the constant repeated image to an extent whereby the image of the can loses its significance and face as the process of repeating overtakes to portray the underlying subtext of mass manufacture and consumption. Michael Foucault, art critic and writer, states the image itself, along with the name it bears, loses its identity. This is true in Davy's work. Her repeated actions of creasing, taping, stamping, and addressing take away the image's face and instead provide a mundane object, a letter and a visual record of the process and journey it has undertaken. What therefore is fascinating is Davy will now take the backseat and allow her images or objects to follow their own journey. The curator will now unfold, pin and exhibit the work how he or she wishes. Davy states the process just completely transforms the photograph into an object that you can treat in this casual way. By this, it is clear that these repetitious acts eventually transform the work into objects, to experience rather than simply aesthetics or mere capturing of mundane objects or moments. Davy deals with cyclical actions in her work My Saints, which portray another sense of repeated actions, much like my collaborative work, focusing on the underground system. We showed a series of videos highlighting aspects of the underground using dark humour. We use processes and journeys as a key element of the work in the same way as Davy. In Davy's interpretation of Jean Genet's Thief Journal, she provides a sense of repeated journeys and actions attempting to reach a final outcome of achieving some money. She never succeeds. The point that I'm trying to make here is that the work is not about the aesthetics of her video. It is not about a profound new outlook on life, but the actions that have taken place. The entire process of going and returning, which then become tied down to a subtext of depression, concealment and suppression in this work. This is similar in my personal practice. I want to discover through routine and repeated actions, marks that we make, paths that we always or never take, and whether we can truly ever do the same thing twice. I'd like to also focus upon physical journeys. What fascinates me in physical journeys is I wish to explore these types of journeys by going on them, much like in Davy's Subway Writers. Davy shares the journeys with the subjects of her photographs, but further on that, the journeys are not fully shared. Someone may get on after Davy or before, vice versa, whilst other subjects may be getting off the train after Davy. The point is there is dispersion between Davy and her subject. Davy photographs people writing on the underground system in New York, which I feel is an interesting idea, as these writings, no matter what or who they are for, are on their own journey. They will continue to go elsewhere, as will Davy and her photos. In terms of site, the underground is an awkward place to work. You are being watched, monitored by anyone and everyone. There is tension whilst working in these systems, as there is a specific etiquette involved, unwritten mostly, granted, but an etiquette and naturally pretty there is an etiquette, and it is naturally pretty quiet. No communication really. People want to get from one place to another in a routinely manner, yet when something changes along that route or an external factor kicks in, for example, individuals writing in Davy's case, um, they have ultimately altered her route simply by being present. Oscillation is key in Davy's images, on, off, at unforeseen instances. She has brought to the surface the difference between these people's journeys, the subjects, the journeys they take, and even further, the journeys the images then take. By this, I mean that. By the journeys that the images then take, I mean that Davy leaves a lot to the curator. She doesn't have 100% full control over how the images will appear on a gallery wall. I.e., the address that Davy wants us to look at. Is it the address that Davy wants us to look at? If so, some may appear upside down. Is it the object then that is apparent in the image? Therefore, what are we as spectators meant to think about in terms of the postage and the address? Why are they there? Are we meant to be looking at the object, or are we meant to be looking at the address? And what exactly are we meant to be looking at? So there's a kind of constant frustration going on, and that's not necessarily left to Davy's Davy's control. The actual presentation for Davy now is neither here nor there. They are objects that she has sent on a journey that will continue their journey. The photographs, therefore, are not fixed in a meaning. This is due to the fact that there is an entire process of translation and transformation that is therefore left to a third-party point of view. What the images, or objects if you like, is ultimately down to is the processes that have occurred before and the remnants of those processes, and indeed the journeys that have been undertaken. Postage and addressing is therefore a physical representation of the passage through time that has commenced. Take Pollock, for example. He holds particular significance to the history of movements. His paintings are an example of a representation of his expressive gestures. Therefore, through this representation, he has ultimately objectified his movements by making work from them. I'm attempting to hold this same resonance in my own work. I wish to concretize a physical representation of the journeys we make through footprints, for example, and surface decay. In a sense, the final visual outcome isn't necessarily what is the most integral to the work. The processes and the material journeys are what I want to exhibit. Similarly, Davy shows this in 50 minutes with dust settled on books. Simple and mundane as that. Here there is a physical representation of what has been before, showing also time passing and a representation of time passing, where these objects are stationary and yet they have still been the subject of a journey and a natural process. It is often easy to skip past the processes that have been undergone and simply look at the final visual outcome of work. Personally, I don't think this is possible. Posting images in Davy's case is key to the whole understanding of her work. It is personal for her, and for me it's the entirety of the journey that then leads to another journey. The infinite is what I'm suggesting. This is accentuating Davy's cyclical work and the cyclical nature for me, and I suppose for Davy, of the underground. As I mentioned before, objectifying images through the process, similar to Davy and Pollock, is key in my personal practice, and I so wish to by highlighting processes and movements in our everyday routine. Ultimately, I believe processes and journeys within artistic practice become manipulated and explored in a strong attempt to portray them as standing alone, to therefore emerge as separate final outcomes themselves.